This is a somewhat rare problem, but it does happen enough that I need to make a video on. Let's say your carburetor was running fine, but it needed a rebuild. So you go ahead and take it apart, clean everything up, put new gaskets on it, throw it back on the car, and now the car will not idle. You have to turn up the idle speed screw as far as you can, and the engine will idle, but the throttle blades are open probably this far, and you're probably at around 2,000 RPM. If you try to reset the idle mixture screws at 1.5 to 2 turns and then start to close the primary throttle blades, the engine just shuts off. So you think to yourself, what's the problem? It was running fine before, you did a rebuild, and now it doesn't run. What's going on? And I actually went through the same problem several years back, and I couldn't figure out what the issue was. And the issue is actually this. I've got a Proform 750 CFM mechanical secondary main body. This is an E85 version, and this is a Demon 575 mechanical secondary carburetor. Because the Demon uses a 650 main body, the bottom throttle bores are actually exactly the same as the 750. So this is an excellent comparison. If we take the gasket that we looked at earlier and line it up on this Proform main body, it actually lines up perfect. Throttle bores line up, everything's good. We take this gasket, we put it on the Demon, everything lines up, throttle bores line up. What's the problem? I want you to take a look at this. We're going to go back to the Proform main body, and I want you to pay attention to this right here. You've got one hole, you've got two holes. We go over to the Demon main body, we've got one hole and two holes, and you've got two for each hole. That's pretty standard. These are the idle mixture feed holes, and this is where your gasoline goes through before it enters the base plate to go in and feed your engine with the idle circuit. But if you guys were actually paying close attention, you'll notice that the holes are not actually in the same place. We have the two holes on the gasket that we lined up on the main body, but if we line it up on this main body, even though the throttle bores are exactly the same, you're going to notice that this hole is not there. If we take off the gasket, the hole's over here. So actually, this is the wrong gasket, and what it's actually doing is that it's blocking the fuel from going into the base plate, and now your carburetor can't feed the engine at idle. And the only way you can have the engine idle is if you turn the speed screw all the way up, but you're not actually feeding it with the idle circuit, you're actually feeding it from the main circuit. And if you guys look down the throttle bores as you're idling at 2,000 RPM, you're going to see that fuel is coming out of the boosters, and that's what's keeping the engine running, not the idle circuit. There's a huge number of variations of base plate gaskets depending on throttle bore size and idle feed location. So grabbing one of these gaskets that I had here on top, we're going to go ahead and drop it on the Demon, and check this out. These actually line up here, whereas the other gasket that we had does not line up. And if we go ahead and grab the Proform main body that we were looking at, we're going to grab the gasket that does fit, and it lines up just fine. And now we're going to grab the other gasket, and it actually does not line up. A similar problem can happen if you mismatch the base plate to the main body. So this is the Proform base plate that goes to this main body, and you have the exact same issue. If you grab one gasket, it lines up perfectly fine, but if you grab the other gasket, it does not line up at all. So if you're building a carburetor from scratch, what can you do? Well, the aftermarket has already solved this issue for a long time now, and this is what they've actually done. They've actually chamfered the hole that doesn't line up, and they've elongated it so that way this part right here can also feed this hole. So if you're using one base plate gasket, it lines up in the channel, which will still feed your idle circuit. And if you use the gasket that is supposed to line up with this idle circuit, the gasket will also line up. So regardless of which gasket you have, as long as it matches the correct throttle bores, then you're going to be perfectly fine. But for those of us that have the mismatched base plate and main body, what options do we have? And for that, I have an easy but meticulous solution, and that is to actually drill out the hole going from the hole that you need to line up to the hole you already have. And what you're going to do is you're probably going to need to take a drill bit, and you're going to drill an angled hole from here to here, or take like a very tiny die grinder and elongate this hole up, so that way you can line it up to the gasket that you have, and your end product will be very similar to the base plate that we just looked at earlier. So whether you're building yourself a new carburetor from scratch or rebuilding an old one, that is something to keep in mind if your carburetor will not idle. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and post them in the comments down below. I will see you guys all in the next one. Night Wrencher signing out.